my career story is almost an accidental one. There's always a solution and support there if you look for it. Ultimately, though, it comes down to gut feeling. There's always a solution and support there if you look for it.
This is the Education Business Podcast for all founders and business owners in the education sector. This podcast is for you if you have an education business or you're thinking about starting one. That could be tutoring, publishing, holiday clubs. It really doesn't matter. You're in business and you're also in education. But most of all, you're focused on improving outcomes for children in the way you know best, through your business. I'm Claire Riley, co-founder of educational resources website Classroom Secrets, and I'll be sharing how to make your education business bigger, better, and have more impact through my own experiences and also the conversations I have with other founders and business owners in education. The Education Business Podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets, helping you to support your children's learning. Sarah, welcome to the Education Business Podcast. Tell us a great story, your career story. What has happened that has led you to the point of having your own franchise business in tutoring? What were all the important points along the way? What have you learned through your career that has helped you to become an education business owner?
Thank you, Claire, for inviting me on today. I've loved listening to your other podcasts, so it's great to finally be involved. I suppose my career story is almost an accidental one. When I think back to when I was at university studying music, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I did know that I wanted to work for myself. I didn't want to be employed as such. I did know that I did not want to become a full-time professional musician. And bizarrely, the main reason for that was that I wanted a dog. And to have a dog, you need a house and you need to be able to look after the dog, walk it and so on. And being a professional musician doesn't really lend itself to that. So I decided to prioritise the dog. As I was at a local university, I was home quite a bit. And at the same time, my mum was moving from teaching to starting her own business. She signed up for an education franchise. And because I was at home a fair bit, I started working with her, doing tutoring, helping with admin and so on. Obviously, broke student, needed to earn some money. And I found I really enjoyed the planning and the admin side, the organising side. And so I gradually got more involved in that. And then when it came round to graduation, I had to pick something to do next and thought, well, why don't I apply to become a franchisee as well? And I'm not sure I ever saw it as a long-term thing, but as a means of starting my own business, being my own boss, being in control of my own destiny, and therefore getting that dog. I'm maybe a little embarrassed to say the teaching side of it was never the main motivation, therefore, for me. Obviously, I loved seeing the kids succeed, and I gained huge satisfaction as I saw that happening. But the actual delivery of the teaching was always something that I enjoyed in the moment, but was also happy to leave to others. So right from the word go, I always had assistants, and then later on with Magic Cats, of course, tutors working with the kids, leaving me to do everything else. So if we jump forwards, I was working with my mum, and then my sister joined the franchise as well. And over time, though, we became frustrated with a lot of the things that the franchisor was doing. They were making changes, they weren't communicating those well with us, and so on. So I left the franchise I was involved in and took another educational games-based franchise on for a year. That was an interesting year, seeing how a new franchise operated, and with hindsight, I learnt some really valuable lessons about what not to do. And in the meantime, my mum had started doing her own tuition programme and had roped my dad into supporting her with his tech skills. So we had my mum and my sister, the educators, me, the organiser, and my dad, the tech guy. So over time, we came together and started running an early version of the Magic Apps workshops just in our local area. And as we started building, obviously we were talking about what we were doing, and we started getting messages from ex-colleagues asking more, what we were doing and could they potentially do it as well. So we thought about it, and with our experiences as franchisees, saw that there was an opportunity to expand our business into other areas using the franchise model. And so we rather jumped in with 2 feet and said to our colleagues, yeah, sure, why not? Come on board. In hindsight, that was probably the worst way in which you could launch a franchise, because we certainly didn't go through all the due diligence that is now commonplace in the sector. But that said, it was a great way to learn very quickly some of the do's and don'ts of franchising. Also, having been franchisees ourselves and seen it from the other side, we realised there were certain things that we definitely wanted to do differently. And that has shaped how we now run things. So the kids and their families are at the centre of everything, closely followed by our principals, which is what we call our franchisees. So our approach for any major decision is always, will that benefit those people? And if it will, then it may well be the right decision. So jumping forward over 20 years to today, and we're looking at how much the tuition landscape has changed, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, and how we've gone in that time from operating exclusively face-to-face tutoring to having to offer online tutoring during COVID, to then taking a step back from that and then reintroducing it more recently as a better formed product. And then most recently, launching our Study Central subscription service for private tutors looking to expand their businesses. So we've evolved over time and will continue to evolve in the future. And that's really exciting.
Sarah, I love your career story. Wow, that's amazing. I love the fact that you were really connected to the kind of life that you really wanted, because that's what it is. I know you sort of made jokes about wanting a dog, but actually you were connected to the kind of lifestyle you wanted. And I had a number of businesses before I had Classroom Secrets. And when I look back, the thing that made it work was that it gave me the kind of lifestyle I was looking for. So I think that's really important to know what it is you really want in the first place. I think it's amazing that you've worked with your family as well. That's something that lots of education business owners do end up doing. Also, it must have been such an amazing experience to see it from the other side before becoming a franchisor yourself. So let's delve into that then. So you've seen it from both sides. In your mind, what is it that franchisors can get wrong?
Oh, yes, that's an interesting question. And I think there would be one main theme, which would be communication. So I mentioned previously that we became quite disillusioned with the franchise we were working with. And one of the main reasons was that they were making changes and we were finding out about these changes via other means. So to give you an example, they launched some products on Amazon. Now, bear in mind, this is well over 20 years ago. Amazon was still very much in its infancy and focusing very much on the supply of books. And they launched a range of books on Amazon. We didn't know about it until one of our own customers came to us and said, oh, I can buy this on Amazon. And we were like, can you? And that was just one example. They then looked to change our franchise agreements to make them much more restrictive and so on. And again, didn't really communicate the reasoning behind this or anything else, or even endeavour to take us with them. I think in industry, employees are much more inclined to support and get on board with major decisions if they feel that they have had some involvement in those decisions. And I believe that's even more important when it comes to a franchisor-franchisee relationship. And that's a unique thing, the franchisor-franchisee relationship, because franchisees are not employees. They can't be told what to do. But that said, there are certain things they are legally obliged to do, either through the function of the franchise agreement or the operations manual. Whereas you could just simply say, well, you have to do this, it's in the operations manual. Your life as a franchisor is going to be much easier if you have franchisees who are keen to do something and willing to do something without you needing to threaten them with the legal requirement. So yes, I think probably communication would be the main thing. And then secondary to that would always be sticking to the company vision. So again, I mentioned that any decisions we make are always about how this is going to benefit our goal to educate as many kids as possible and to empower people to provide that education. So provided the decisions we make can be centred around that, then again, I think you get the buy-in from the franchisees and your life is much easier. There is a difficult balance sometimes to strike, though, between what franchisees are asking of you at an individual level and what is going to be of benefit to the network as a whole. So that can lead to some awkward conversations when a franchisee has a firm view as to what is going to be best for them, but perhaps they don't see the bigger picture and why what they want won't work for their fellow franchisees. But again, it's about communication, being open and honest about decisions that you make and trying as best you can to find a workable compromise. Don't get me wrong, you will get the occasional franchisee who is, how can I put it, more challenging than the others. You know, the old 80-20 rule, or you can't please all the people all the time. You know, pick any of those sayings that you like, really. But by and large, we find by communicating well and ensuring franchisees understand what is happening and why, then I think that makes for a much better relationship and a much healthier franchise.
I'm not a franchisor, but I do talk to quite a lot of franchisors, and I do think there are lots of similarities really between having franchisees and having employees. I know they're not the same, but when it comes to communication, there is sort of a similar sense of trying to take everyone on a journey with you. You obviously have a background in the arts, so do I. I did performing arts, and what I didn't realize when I started a business is that actually the thing that I would take from that that would be the most important part of my job, especially now when I've kind of gone back to founder, is storytelling. I've just got to be a great storyteller and keep telling people the story to make sure that they're coming in the same direction that I'm going. And I would never realize that before. Let's go back to what it's like to be a franchisor. I know that many franchisors find it difficult to find the right kind of franchisee, and it can be a bit of a trial and error process when you're first setting it up. In your mind, what makes a really great franchisee?
Well, yeah, before we open that can of worms, I think I'd just maybe want to make one more comment about what you said about performing arts. I think you're absolutely right. If you've got that sort of background like we both have, then you almost view, a sales call or a teaching presentation or something like that as a performance, and you prepare for it in exactly the same way. I do think if you've got experience in performing arts, it really does help. When I was younger, I also did public speaking competitions alongside my regular music performances. So if there's something I never really panic about, it's the idea of getting up in front of a load of people and speaking, or indeed chatting with someone on a podcast. And if it's something that I am passionate about, then I almost feel that I don't need to prepare. It seems to come quite naturally. But anyway, back to identifying a good franchise. Well, I hate to say it, but it's almost impossible. Yes, there are some things that we at Magic Cats look for. Obviously someone needs to be fluent in English, for example. They need to be quick to respond to the emails that we send them. They need to be presentable, comfortable talking. And certainly something that we do drill home to people right from the word go is that when a parent is looking to enrol their child in one of our workshops, the brand is doing a lot to attract them, but ultimately they will be buying from the franchisee. So that franchisee needs to be confident that they can sell themselves as a person as much as they can sell the benefits of the programme. I always look for enthusiasm from a candidate. I ask them what they like most about our programme, what stands out, which especially appeals to them, if you like. And the quality of their response helps filter out quite a lot of people in the early days. Someone who can't give me a good answer has obviously not bothered to learn about the programme. And if their answer focuses on the wrong things in my eyes, then it's a red flag. Ultimately, though, it comes down to gut feeling. And I could tell you about times when all the on-paper evidence has been that this person should be a good franchisee, and I've ignored that niggle which says to me there's something not quite right. And then I've spent the next 3 to 5 years maybe not regretting that decision, but certainly mulling on it. I think one of the things as a franchisor you have to really learn in the early days is how much to rely on your gut. Some franchisers will take on anyone who ticks the boxes. For others like us, as a very small family franchise, it's so important that we have a professional yet friendly relationship with our franchisees. We don't have a big team, so we can't say, well, this franchisee doesn't get on particularly well with this member of staff, So we'll simply hand them to another member of the franchise support team. In a way, I'd love to be in that position because it would certainly make some things easier. But the bottom line is we're not. So I need to feel that I can work with the franchise candidate and have that balanced relationship day to day. And we've touched a couple of times now on the fact that franchisees are not employees. But I am in a way their boss because I'm the director of the franchise. And ultimately, if they're doing something which may bring the franchise into disrepute, then I have to be able to require them to make changes. It's extremely rare with a good franchisee, and I can only really remember occasions when I've had a problem, if you want to call it that, with that occasional franchisee where I've had that niggle in my gut that's been telling me they're not quite right. That's not to say that they haven't been successful franchisees, but they've always been more challenging to manage and the most likely to complain or not do something asked of them with good grace. So in summary, yes, you do need to have certain requirements. Some franchises will only award a franchise to someone with a specific degree. Other franchises will check the level of assets a candidate has before they can get their franchise awarded. And in the same way that franchises are vastly different, you've got Magic Hats and then you've got McDonald's. So the requirements will be very, very different as well. But the bottom line for me is I like to be able to spend a bit of time getting to know a franchise candidate so I can see what my gut says. And that used to be a lot easier. When we had face-to-face meetings as a matter of course, you could have a chat over a tea break and get to know a bit more of their life history, their personality, away from the more formal presentation training scenarios. But now, of course, I'm relying on being able to see them through a computer camera in a artificial situation. And so making that same judgment is ultimately harder. I know some franchises use personality tests and so on, and I can see a benefit to that, but they're expensive. And for us, they would simply push the franchise fee higher. And at the end of the day, they are still information on paper rather than evaluating the physical person in front of you. So basically, I rely on my gut.
Do you teach children as part of your business offering? Have you considered using resources from Classroom Secrets? At Classroom Secrets, we're always adding new resources for a range of subjects, and we're keen to hear your suggestions for resources too. We know that you didn't go into business to work more hours than you did in the classroom. You went into business to give you freedom. Let us help with that. Visit classroomsecrets.co.uk to sign up. My co-founder Ed will be so happy that you said that it's all about your gut. So when he took over as CEO a few years ago, that's what he implemented. So now when we take on employees, which, as you say, everything you mentioned, same things with employees, he now has a gut feel call at the end of the recruitment process. So whoever the hiring manager is will manage that process. But then at the very end, Ed has a gut feel call. And if it's somebody who Ed is hiring, then I will do the gut feel call. And you can listen to lots of business books and they'll say you can't rely on your gut. But I think there's something about it. We've certainly found that, and we have hired hundreds of people over the 10 years we've been hiring. So, yeah, completely get that and appreciate that. So, you also help tutors through Study Central as well as Magic Hat. So, how does that work then, Study Central?
Yes, Study Central. So Magic Hats has always been about setting up a face-to-face tuition business where we focus on small groups and supporting kids in their local community. It's a traditional franchise model and that works really well for people. Within Magic Hats, we never intended to offer online tuition, but when the pandemic hit, we had no choice but to move online as the survival of the business depended on it. Once the pandemic subsided and we were back face-to-face, we withdrew the online service, but more recently reintroduced it as an option for our Magic Hats principals. And now some do offer online tutoring, but Magic Hats is still focused on face-to-face tuition. And so online for Magic Hats is very much an extra, which is a nice to have rather than an integral part of that business. One thing the pandemic did, which could be considered a good thing, was accelerate the development of the tech that was needed to deliver effective online learning. And although there was initial kickback against doing everything online, we are now in a situation where around half of all parents actively seek out online tuition in preference to face-to-face, whereas before the pandemic, that figure was more like only around 10%. And of course, therefore, there are a high number of private tutors who only offer online tutoring. And as a company, our aim has always been to empower as many people as possible, to support as many children and young people as possible to realise their full potential. So in keeping with that, it makes sense to offer our online materials to a broader customer base, and that's private tutors, and that's what we're doing with Study Central. So there are already a lot of online tutor platforms out there, but they are generally set up for quite large tutoring businesses and are very complicated to run. They target tuition companies where one person is managing a big team of tutors, and those tutors in turn are responsible for their own materials, scheduling and so on. But we wanted to keep it simple and look to support the single person tuition business. So those people who operate independently as private tutors. And so we've built our systems specifically for that. So in a nutshell, we now have the only platform out there which includes pre-prepared teaching materials, resources and lesson plans, as well as the scheduling and feedback tools needed to run an efficient and effective online tutoring business, all with a month-by-month subscription and no complicated setup. And just as an aside, our integrated teaching platform is Lesson Space, which you might have heard of. It's a very popular teaching platform and it has loads of great tools itself. So we've adapted all of our online lessons to make the most of those tools, and the combination of our materials and Lesson Space's functionality is probably what makes Study Central so unique but also effective. I'm really excited about what we can do to help the private tuition industry with our combination of Magicats and Study Central in the future. And so that's really where I'm focusing my efforts from, well, I guess now until retirement.
That is so interesting because I'm currently interviewing Matthew Henshaw from Lesson Space at the moment. So that definitely helps me connect a few dots. You mentioned retirement. It's one of my favourite topics, so I need to dig into that now. What does retirement look like for you? Because I think in this world of entrepreneurship, retirement is not necessarily traditional. I think about my parents and other older adults in my family and what they wanted out of retirement, and I just think for me it's not the same. For you, what does retirement look like? Is it working a few days? Are you going to graduate it up to retirement? You know, have you got certain things that you want to do in retirement? Is it that you're going to have another business venture on the side? Are you going to invest? Do you want to walk away completely? What does retirement look like for you if you imagined it right now?
I thought you might pick up on the retirement comment. And I have to say, there are mornings when I wake up and I can't quite believe that there's probably less of my life ahead of me than there is behind me. But that's probably a bit deep for a business podcast. So yes, retirement. I suppose I don't really know at this point what retirement looks like. Because I run my own business, I've always had flexibility in each day. So if I felt like taking the dog for a walk at lunchtime or going to meet a friend for coffee and having a couple of hours off, I've always been able to do that because my working time is flexible. So you could argue from that perspective that retirement might not look that much different. And I can't actually envisage a day when I don't do something on the business. So at this point in my life, I guess I'm thinking about how the business can be a little bit more independent. So less reliant on me being around day to day, to make it easier to take random days off, go on holidays and so on. And if I wasn't working full time, then I would be able to do that much more easily. Also, because we're a family business, there's not just me to consider. There's my sister as well. And funnily enough, I was chatting earlier today with someone who's in a similar position to me, you know, also a family business, been at it for quite a long time, now thinking about, you know, what's going to happen in the future. She's a similar age to me as well, and we decided that really any decision has to be made by the family together. So it's not just about what I want to do in my retirement, but also what my sister might want to do in her retirement. And that's a conversation we probably need to have quite soon. And so that's really where I'm at the moment. I'm thinking, well, I've maybe got 15 or 20 years of work I could do ahead of me, but do I want to be working that long? Or do I want to be saying to myself, in 5 to 10 years' time, when my husband will almost certainly be retired, do I want to be still working every day in the business? Or do I want to have a lot of it working independently of me? Whether that takes the form of other staff members or the famous passive income that everybody aspires to achieve. What do I want that to look at? I do have other interests. I'm a semi-professional singer, but I already fit that in. I consider it my second job in a way, but it's very much one I enjoy and would want to continue with. But even now, because of my flexible working, I can do it as and when I want to. So if someone asks me to go and sing a wedding, or more likely, unfortunately, a funeral in the middle of the day, I can usually say yes. So yeah, it's a tricky one. More of a consideration actually for me at the moment is what happens to the business should I get ill. We have recently taken out insurance for exactly that reason. But it's far more likely that something like that will happen in the next 5 to 10 years than me retiring. So I think, again, when you're running a business where you are basically one of only a couple of key people who keep the wheels on the bus, you do need to think about what would happen if one of us was struck down with something tomorrow and literally could not work, had no option but to stop working for a period of time. What would happen? Yes, the insurance would kick in to pay for someone to come in and run things instead of me, but who would tell them how to do that? Because I wouldn't be able to. So in reality, would there still be a business to come back to? So for me, that's actually the more important point at the moment. And I think it's one that applies to all founders or owner-operators. And I suspect very few of them actually have solid plans in place, because I know that it's something that I think about quite regularly, and I've not managed to find a solution. I'd be interested. Have you got plans for that?
I love that we're actually talking about this. I just think it'd be so helpful for people, because we don't talk about things like this, do we? So it's good to get other people's perspectives and think about it for ourselves. So I just want to say I resonate with the whole, well, I'm sort of retired now, because I feel that like we have flexibility around the school holidays. Myself and my husband both work in the same business. So while that has its downsides, it also has its benefits as well, because he can come to all the assemblies and he can have time off in the school holidays. Whereas when he was working for an employer, he'd never be able to do that. And, that's a very different thing for him in comparison to his own parents and to my parents as well. So we're changing the trajectory there. You raise some really important points, like what basically succession planning. We do succession planning, but things change and things are constantly changing and you have to keep up with it. And even then, you can plan, but it's still a worry. It's still something I worry about. Where there is a benefit, myself and Ed, we are obviously both in the company. So if one of us was to get ill, then the other one would still be in the company. However, if something terrible happened, like an accident or something, and that affected us both, obviously that would bring up issues. Now, at this point, I'm not really working that much in the business. So I oversee things and I'm involved in things, but I'm not running the business. Ed is running the business. So in that sense, I don't need to worry. Now, we obviously have key people in the business as well, but it does run through my mind. And one of the things that I think as well is that we work with two externals, our CFO and our mentor. And I know that if there was a situation that they would also step in to make sure that we got the right people to help move us forward. We've obviously got documentation, probably not as much documentation as you, because you're a franchise, you've got to have reams and reams and reams of it. But I think it's not just about what to do, it's the how we expect it done. And for me, that's about having the right people executing in that way already, but also able to communicate to others how things should be done. Because when I think about some of the biggest problems that we've had with team members, it's them doing things in a way that doesn't fit with how we need things to be done. And I used to think that was okay, and that if I needed them to do it a certain way, then that was me being controlling. But I'm not talking about, oh, you need to do your emails this certain way. It's more the reasons for doing it and how it serves the customers. So I think, yeah, it's really important to think about and harder to do when you are more in the business. I feel quite privileged in the fact that I really have stepped out of the business quite a lot. And that's why I have this podcast as a passion project more than anything. But if something happened to me, things would keep moving. So, yes, but it is something that I keep thinking about and not worrying about, but keep at the forefront of my mind and make intentional plans about as well. Thank you so much. I've had such a lovely conversation. This has been fantastic. I feel like we need to have another podcast in the future because there's probably so much more we could say. But I'm interested to know, what do you think that we haven't talked about, that we should have talked about, that education business owners should know?
Oh, that's a question that could open up so many cans of worms. I think probably the one I would focus on would be talking around how small business ownership is really challenging, and an education business even more so. Sadly, in my opinion, a lot of that comes down, in recent years at least, to decisions made by various governments which have been really anti-small business. And I'm not going to get political, but if you look back 20 or 30 years, and the paperwork and regulation now is off the charts when compared to what it was when I started. And that's not to say it's all bad, but successive governments seem to have overreacted to a few bad actors, putting more and more checks and balances in place, and made life for good moral business owners that much harder. So a lot of the stress is caused by changes in regulations. You have a lack of information, misinformation, and the feeling of isolation, I think, that you get from thinking you have to navigate all of this on your own. And that's really probably what I would discuss in another podcast, because running any small business can feel isolating. You're working from home, having to research and find out answers for yourself. There's nobody on hand to talk through problems with. And it does get really stressful and demoralising at times. So I think I would suggest that someone who runs an education business should look out for other people who run other small businesses, not necessarily education, but who have a similar mindset to you, and try and build a network of support. And there are various different ways in which you can do that. One of the most obvious is networking, joining local business groups. And ideally, in my world, it would be face-to-face. I'm not a fan of online networking. I don't think it works, as you don't get the opportunity to have a natural conversation. But when I go to local networking groups, I'm not looking to sell, which of course a lot of people who go there are, but I'm looking to connect with other people who are running a small business. I'm on the lookout for someone who might be able to give me some accountancy advice or do some photography for me. And making those connections locally is so useful. And then you can find the people who you gel with and bounce ideas off one another. And it can become a really great opportunity to step out of the day-to-day treadmill of your business and actually think about the broader picture, combining ideas that you might get from other industries away from education. Something else, obviously, you could look at would be to get business coaching, and there are hundreds and hundreds of business coaches out there. They do cost, and that approach doesn't suit everyone. I've had a small amount of business coaching, and it has been useful, but that was business coaching from someone who I met networking and developed a relationship with over a number of years. So when I felt I did need that extra input, that's more how I viewed it, not so much business coaching, but someone to bounce these ideas off. That was the person I chose because I already knew that they had the same thoughts as me, and it was really great to have a second opinion. I think I'd also say that as a small business owner, you're having to do everything, be the accountant, the marketer, the customer support, the coffee maker, and there's always lots more to learn. So I try to learn bite size. I don't get bogged down in big learning sets. I try and spend a small amount of time each week upskilling a particular thing, usually based on what I know is coming up. If I know I need to create a new marketing campaign, I might spend a bit of time getting to know some of the latest AI tools, for example. But that brings me on to probably the most important way, in my opinion, of developing a business, which is outsourcing. So by that I mean contracting another small business to do something for you. And that can be a great way to free up your time, but without the commitment and logistical issues of taking on an employee. I remember I used to look around my home office and think, how can I fit an employee in here when I need one? And ultimately, I haven't done that. I have outsourcers based in Norwich and Red Hill and various other places, and I never see them face to face, or very rarely see them face to face, but they're beavering away on my behalf. And a lot of people would simply say, oh, I can't afford to do that. And in fact, I was at the Institute of Children's Activity Providers Conference last week, and there was a session there I attended about expanding your business beyond a one-man band. And the presenter there talked about how he had taken on other people to deliver what he was delivering. It was some sort of outward bound type activity, and he'd successfully done that. But he was still doing all of the back end stuff, all of the admin, all the marketing, all the customer support. And when I suggested he could outsource, he simply said, oh, I can't afford it. And actually, I would strongly dispute that. What I believe he hadn't factored in was that if he outsourced some of the things to someone else, just how much time that would free up for him to then build his business in other ways. Plus, someone who's a specialist in their own area would complete a specific task more quickly and more cost effectively than you could, because they do it all the time. So for anyone who would want to consider extra help, I would say assess your skills. Look at what you're good at and what you enjoy, and those two aren't necessarily the same thing. But then also focus on what you're not good at or what you don't enjoy and would dearly love to not have to do anymore. And maybe look to pass one of those 2 or 3 things onto another local business. For example, if you really don't think marketing is your thing, look for a small independent marketer and maybe have a contract with them where they will do 10 hours a month for you. And then if that relationship isn't working or your needs change, it's relatively simple to cancel the contract. Taking on an employee is much more of a commitment, and if things don't work out, it's a much more complicated process to get rid of them. So from my viewpoint, outsourcing is by far and away the better option. And when looking at the cost, it is more controllable than having an employee. And do remember to consider what you're saving in terms of time. And when you do that, actually, it becomes affordable. So to directly answer your question, what should every education business owner know? I would say you need to know that you're not alone, and there's always a solution and support there if you look for it. And to your comment about doing more podcasts, I've really enjoyed chatting to you today, and I'd be more than happy to do that, especially about options for how to scale with flexibility maybe. And because us small business owners have to stick together, whatever I can do to support, whatever ideas I can bring to the table, I'm more than happy to do that. Thanks very much for having me.
Really helpful points there, Sarah. I feel like I can speak to both sides of the outsourced or employee coin. So there are about 30 of us at the moment at Classroom Secrets who are employed by the business, but we've been on a journey with that ourselves. So originally I started using freelancers. Then after a period of time, I started taking on employees to help manage those freelancers. Then we transitioned everybody to be employees. And then later on, we actually started using freelancers again. And I actually think now we have the best balance. So we do outsource some things and it does help control costs, as you say. And we also have employees as well. So I think it's about the scale of your business as well. But it is a really, really helpful option. And I think you're right, people do need to do that. And if you don't and you end up doing all the back end stuff, it can be exciting at the beginning. But what you end up doing is creating yourself a job as a founder that you probably never wanted, which is basically back office admin. And that isn't really that much fun. So it's worth remembering that. But Sarah, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for listening to the Education Business Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets. To find more resources to grow your business, visit classroomsecrets.co.uk.